Okay, and then sure. So I'll wait for you. Go grab some coffee on the side. Sounds good.
I could go to Chicago or
Subdivision by trust line.
I didn't know that because George showed me.
We're in the way.
Good morning. Welcome to the Technology Club, the Sunflower Tech Club. Today is our last Tech Talk and meeting until October. We're really glad you came. We're sure with everybody leaving for the summer, how many people we would have. I'm Kapta Mates. I'm the president of the Technology Club. And we have Larry Schreier, our vice president and tech team coordinator, and our secretary, Maureen Rodriguez, and Martin Rodriguez is our director. Liz Perry is our treasurer, and Tim Walter is our past president who helps with all kinds of things. I'd also like to introduce a new tech team addition, Steve Morris. He's here from Washington, and he's a wonderful addition because he knows a lot about technology. Even as president, there's a lot of things I don't know. So I appreciate having the tech team. They're really what makes it happen. And before we have our speaker, there's just a few things we want to discuss with you. Larry, would you mind giving an update on the lab?
I'm planning on doing with the lab, since they're replacing the carpet there, we're going to be starting at 1 o'clock on the 18th. We're going to take down the equipment in there, move it into the craft room. And then 9 o'clock on the 20th, we're hopefully going to move it all back if everything goes well. So that's one of the big things that's happening over there. When we do that, we're going to be doing a remodel of the lab as well. We're going from 7 Windows PCs down to 5. We're putting in a different Mac in there. It's an actual desktop Mac that we're putting in there. So there's going to be those improvements, plus we're putting in some charging stations for iPads and phones, so you can charge your phone while you're over here. We're putting in a couple of power strips. We're basically making a work area between the 2 big cabinets that are on the south wall. So that'll be a work area that'll have these charging cables. It'll have lights above. It'll have a whiteboard behind it so that it can be kind of a workspace for you to bring your laptops and iPads over and use those, use the printers and stuff there for that. So that's going to all happen between the 18th and 20th after they get done putting the carpet in. So that's really about it there. The other thing I wanted to bring up though is the new Wi-Fi. I don't know, I hope everybody got the information about the new Wi-Fi, but the Wi-Fi's name is Tech Club. We're not using 2G, 5G, anything like that anymore. It's just Tech Club. And the password stayed the same. We didn't change the password. So that's all still there. What we did with that is it's a mesh network, so you don't have to worry about, am I in the exercise room? Am I by the pool? Where am I that I get on the right one? It'll automatically put you on the right node to be able to get the best signal. So that's kind of how that works. So that's taken care of for you. We just finished that up. And that's about it for the lab.
Oh, thank you, Larry. And I don't want to forget Harry Slingman, who's also on the tech team, and he is crucial for maintaining the lab. He keeps the paper and the printers and everything else, so thank you, Harry. Appreciate that. I also want to say that after all this remodeling is done, hopefully by the 20th, on Sunday, the 22nd at 2 o'clock, you're all invited to come and to see what the new lab looks like. We'll have like a grand reopening for about an hour, just come in and see what's new, so that you'll be set up. Maybe you'll end up using the lab more than you have been, or you'll know how to use things. Larry has a mission over the summer to kind of coordinate some things and make things more uniform on the computers and so forth. We also have talked about maybe having 1 or 2 health sessions over the summer. How many people come to the health sessions? Bringing your laptops or tablets or phones? Good. But we get people. The thing is, we also have students from around high school honor society who come and join us and bring their knowledge about usually about phones and often know more about phones. And so we'll probably have one of those. And we're also thinking about having something called seminars on a specific topic. And that might just be a small group of people. We might even be in the conference room using YouTube to learn how to do something together. Or we may have some people who'd like to step up and teach on a particular topic, because every single member of the Tech Club is welcome to join us with the information that they have and share it with each other. Because as I said, there's a lot that I can learn. So today we're going to learn about solar panels. When I moved here last June, and my realtor referred me to Gary Parks, an electrician, to help me with a few things. And I asked him who we had for solar. And he recommended Sunbright Solar. And I figured since he's an electrician, he should really know what's good. Now, as it turns out, in the sun catcher this month, Sunbright Solar has their flyer here. And today we have Mark Johnson and Daniel from Sunbright to tell us all about it. Thank you for coming.
You're welcome.
Just as a disclaimer, we always say that this is not an endorsement of any vendor, but this is information sharing. So are you going to sit there?
Yeah, Daniel's gonna speak. I'm gonna do the.
Oh, yeah, here you go.
All right. Can everybody hear me all right?
Now we need the mic for the.
You need a microphone? Okay. All right, well then I will try to hold it as a close proximity to me, and hopefully we can all hear this well. How many people here have solar already? All right, that's a good thing. It's some good adoption rates. You're a better statistic than the vast majority of per capita. But that is growing every day for obvious reasons. You know, in Arizona, we have an abundance of sunlight, a bit of a scarcity of water. We do use some water to generate electricity. We don't use any generating solar. You know, the alternative without deregulated utilities is just the utility company. So solar at a minimum presents a second option for you. There's a lot of benefits. I'll talk a little bit about that. But since this is a little bit more tech geared, I'll try to not take up too much time covering fluff and things like that, and have a little bit of time at the end to field some questions. The solar industry is definitely moving at a rapid pace. We're seeing battery integration, the integration of electric vehicles into the solar systems, smart home technology, you name it. Panels have definitely increased in their performance specifications. I'll kind of go over what we look at in that, and just try to keep this more informational than salesy in terms of the presentation. So to start off, my name, you go to the About Sunbright, I guess. My name is Daniel Skippers. I am the owner of Sunbright Solar. I've been in the solar industry since about 2008. I went to a vocational school to become a solar technician. So I was a technician, graduated to an installation crew lead. So I led a team of installers for not a long time because I'm not a fan of working on the roofs in the summer heats. But then I went into project management. I was a project manager, mostly residential, but did some commercial and also have participated in what's called O&M, operations and maintenance for utility scale applications. Led a team in Tucson and then also in San Antonio, Texas. So I've got experience in multiple states. Like I said, I went to school for solar, so I am a certified technician. I also have NABCEP. NABCEP is the solar industry certification as electrical contractors, which is what all solar companies are. That's a very broad field, right? You could be wiring up a commercial building or hanging a ceiling fan. And neither one of those two knows a whole lot about solar. Solar is a bit of a niche in the industry. So NABCEP is the solar industry certification. I have full licensing there. And then I also did some volunteer teaching when Pima Community College had their solar vocational program. I was a guest speaker on a regular basis for that until that program wound up. So been doing solar a long time, got a lot of experience in many different applications. We started off with what was called a string inverter. That was like the original solar inverter technology that has since gone by the wayside. Microinverters came out, I know those very well. And then SolarEdge DC optimized. And then there's been an increase in panel technology. So I'm experienced with multiple different types of panels. There's different panels for different applications. To start off with, in this industry, solar is also quite a broad name. There's different types of solar. There's concentrated solar, which is parabolic mirrors that shine up generally to either a salt water or glycol solution type of thing. And that is creating heat. And then that heat goes through a heat transfer into especially a steam turbine. And that is for utility scale applications. You see those in large applications. There's solar water, which comes in two forms. One is domestic hot water, where we have essentially what is the hot car effect. That's a small rectangular thing, and we're got copper pipes in there, and we take the sun's heat and it exacerbates it with the hot car effect there. And we heat our domestic hot water for showering, many other laundry applications. There is pool hot water, which is generally found in two applications. You either see the round coils, which if you're ever looking at, I recommend those over the square or rectangular flat mat applications. But that is what we call a direct application. In other words, the water that is going to be heated is actually flowing up on a roof for our pools. Most of the time in the other solar water application, it's a glycol or like a radiator fluid type solution that's going to go through heat transfer. So the water going up and down that's getting heated up is not actually what's coming out of the faucet, it's just being transferred over. And then there's solar photovoltaic, which is the photons from the sun hitting a silica cell, electrons getting bounced around, that's creating current. Current is electricity. Voltage is a byproduct of current. Volts times amps equals watts. That's what we call Ohm's law. That's the basis of electricity. And so those are your different types of solar. Now, personally, I specialize in solar electric, and a little bit more than that. I specialize in the full picture side of things because, yes, originally we were very much solar electric, powering our house, but now we are integrating in with other technologies such as, like I mentioned, batteries, electric vehicle chargers, smart home technology, which we've had for a minute. It's just commonly been Alexa, right? If somebody has those Alexa things, they have those little socket adapters and you can say, turn on this or turn on that, and it's customizable. And honestly, I let my wife figure all the details of that out. For being in technology, I'm not always the most technologically savvy, but I try. But now solar is kind of wrapping its way around, and it's also gone through some unique changes throughout my short time in this industry. 10 to 12 years, not the longest timeline ever, but also if you think about 10 years ago, the amount of solar panels that were around town, I kind of equate it to dog years, right? Like this industry moves rapidly and you have to stay agile and you have to stay up to date, which as a company we need to do. So we try to do that. And we try to offer that in our products, technologies, and things like that. So I'm going to talk briefly about some of that stuff. I think if we want to learn about solar, we want to learn it kind of how it works, what we look for in a solar panel, what we look for in inverters, some pros and cons, get an idea of the advancement of the industry. And if you do look at solar, I want to teach you the metrics that we would look at, because solar is an investment. And so generally when we look at an investment, we're going to look at several criteria. You know, the first thing that comes to mind when everybody looks at solar is return on investment in years, right? If you spend $10,000 on a solar system and that thing generates $1,000 worth of electricity, you would have a 10-year payback on that system. We look at more than just that, but that's a good starting point and worthwhile to look at. Now, another one is rate of return, which is the exact same thing, because when we look at investments, generally we have 401ks, stocks, bonds, et cetera. We always look at rate of return. So in that same analogy, if you spent $10,000 on a solar system and it generated $1,000 worth of power, you would have a 10% rate of return. Now, one of the benefits of solar is that if you think about what solar is, it is electricity. And electricity in this day and age is a cost of living expense, right? No matter how we're doing financially, we have to have about 4 things for our household to keep it going. And 1 is a roof over our head, 2 is water, 3 is electricity, and 4 is food. And, you know, without deregulated utility, currently, everybody here is TEP or bust, right? TEP or kerosene lamps, which nobody's doing. So, you know, this at least provides a different opportunity, but we can also look at the alternative, which is what we call levelized cost of electricity, right? So how much do we pay for electricity is also a nice starting point, right? You can figure that out on a rough basis by taking your last utility bill, finding the kilowatt hours that they bill us in, the dollar amounts, and dividing the 2. And it kind of gives you a rough cost of electricity. Now, we all are on TEP's infinite wisdom rate plans, which they do not make it easy to read and understand. So with TEP, there's multiple rate plans available: time of use, standard, demand. There's also summer rates and there's winter rates, with summer being more expensive. Statistically, we also use a little bit more electricity in the summer. There's taxes that go into our bill. So whether we live in the city or the county and use the same amount of power, we might pay a slightly different amount for electricity. So because there's summer rates, winter rates, and all these variables, oh, I forgot one. It's tiered. So the more we use, the more we pay. Depending on time of year, you get the higher tiers, just like a water bill. Cost of electricity goes up. And by nature, utility bills are a bit inflationary, right? We don't have that crystal ball, but statistically, they tend to go up with time, even if we're not using more electricity. So at least solar gives us another option and a potential hedge against that. So, you know, we look at the ROI, we look at the rate of return, and then we want to look at this levelized cost of power. So I think the better way to look at levelized cost of power without putting inflation in there would be to grab your last year's worth of electricity bills, if you have them, take the total kilowatt hours, because that's what we're billed in, similar to gallons on a water bill, and the total cost, and divide those 2. And then maybe we assume it's going to be a little bit higher, but generally speaking, going to fall somewhere around 15 to 17 or 18 cents per unit of energy. Now, that said, there's a connection charge in there that is an unavoidable cost, whether or not we're using electricity. So in reality, it's a couple cents lower, but it's also rising with time. You know, utility rates just tend to rise with time. On the other side of that, we have solar systems, and we have solar panels, we have an inverter. Now, one thing does happen to solar systems with time that is worthwhile, and why we look at the solar panels that we would choose to adopt on our house, and that's called degradation. So as a solar panel sits on a roof year after year, baking under the hot sun, it's going to lose some of its power output. And so what we look at to discern what losses it's going to have, because different panels have different rates of degradation or losses with time. We look at the solar panel warranty, which is generally also found in the data sheet. Commonly in this industry is quantified as a % at year 25. They all have 25-year warranties. It doesn't mean they're all consistent. When I got into solar, most panels were actually fairly consistent. There was 1 million manufacturers, but the technology behind them was pretty close. There was some deviation amongst manufacturers, but what you found is the warranties for solar panels were almost verbatim. It was 80% of its day 1 output at year 25. Now, 2 things actually go into that. The first thing is after the first year to 2 years in service, we call that soiling. And soiling is just a thin layer of dust, pollen, debris that's going to accumulate on things that live on our roof, right? And until we start manufacturing solar panels with windshield wipers, that is consistent with just about every technology. So you usually use about 1 or 1.5, 2% of your power output after that first 6 months of service. Common question I get is, well, what about cleaning my solar panels? We don't advise it. You know, if you value your time, you know, you've got to be worth at least $20, $25 an hour, and it's going to take you an hour or 2 to clean it. And on the residential applications, you're probably not going to get $50 more of electricity before it returns to dirty again. So if you do want to clean your solar panels, good for you. But, you know, sometimes that's a scary proposition. We often have tile roofs with pitches, 2 stories. That could be a trip hazard. We might not have the best tips or whatever. I don't even clean my solar panels anymore. I barely hang my Christmas lights well. So as a company, we don't recommend cleaning solar panels in the residential applications. Now, that said, there is a company out there that does offer this service, and you can hire them to clean them. You know, sometimes aesthetics is a dynamic here. And if the solar panels are living on the front of your house, every 3 or 4 years, you might see some bird crap or something up there that you might want to clean. And if that's the case, you can garden hose it. You can use those hose adapters for like tall windows. That might get it done. You can head up there with a cloth or a squeegee. Probably not the best idea to do it in the middle of the day. These things do heat up. But if you want to clean your solar panels, that's fine. It's just going to produce more power for a duration of time before they return back to dirty again. But generally speaking, we don't clean our solar panels. But they do suffer from degradation. We find that in a warranty rated at a percent year 25. 80% was the industry standard. So if you reverse that math, 80% over 25 years is 0.07, a little under 1% annual loss. But this solar industry has grown up. New technologies have come online within the last 5 to 10 years. And certain manufacturers, the one we use included, have increased their warranty capability. This panel right here is 91% at year 25. The one we're deploying now is now 92% at year 25. And if you reverse that math, that's 0.25% annual loss. So the difference in these two panels do not separate year one, but solar is the long game. Solar panels have a 25-year warranty. Solar inverters have a 25-year warranty. And the life expectancy of this thing is actually closer to 35 or 40 years. The only reason it stops there is because most likely technology will surpass them in that timeline clip, or we will have moved on. You know, so they do essentially work in perpetuity, but you know, 80% is a 20% loss, and generally we use more power with time, not less power with time. So generally speaking, we oversize a little bit based upon our current needs. We also have to look at the utility rate structure. Do you leave there?
Yep.
So since I'm on the panel section, let's just talk about what we look at in a solar panel. So, you know, generally speaking, you want to think about what the solar industry is. We are a heavily subsidized industry, not only here domestically, but globally as well. And globally, we've had some issues on the manufacturing side. Particularly, I'm speaking to Germany and also in China, which really don't want to adopt a whole lot of the Chinese panels because they have obvious stigma, dumping, things like that associated. But in Germany and in China, they had these great state level subsidies for manufacturers that were then removed, typically for a political reason. And certain manufacturers have gone out of business. 25 years is a long time for a warranty. You don't find that with many things that we buy. Well, it's also a subsidized warranty. So picking a name brand has good potential for being around for the lifetime of their warranty to honor that should we ever need it is a step one in looking at solar panels. So Panasonic is what we deploy. They obviously fit that bill. That's a 100-year-old company. You know, I can't guarantee another 25. They've got a better chance than a Yingli or a Hanwha, or maybe something we might not have ever heard of prior to looking into solar. So you do want to look at the name brand. Now, after that, you're a consumer. And if you have 3 solar companies come out to your house and present to you with solar, you're going to have 3 people saying, I have the best panel. And as a consumer, you want to figure out, you know, who's telling the truth and who's really got the best panel, right? And to do that, you use what's called a data sheet, also known as a cut sheet. It's where we have what's called standard test conditions put on paper. Manufacturers don't get to dictate how those readings come out. It's an industry standard, and it's what we call standard test conditions, or STC. So it levels the playing field, and manufacturers can't cheat on it, and neither can salesmen without a check, which is you looking at the data sheet. So data sheets are widely available on Google. But that said, we also need to know what to look at in a data sheet when looking at a solar panel, right? So generally, the first thing that everybody gravitates towards is efficiency. So efficiency is an easy one. It's rated as a percent, and higher the better. Generally in this industry, anything over 20% is pretty good. Now, efficiency is a metric of power per square foot, not necessarily yield, right? So here's an analogy for that. If there are two 300-watt solar panels, and one is 20% efficient and one is 15, I would ask a setup question, which is, which one do you think gives you more power? And the obvious answer would probably be 20, but that's not actually accurate. That's a setup question. If they're both 300-watt panels, if everything else is fairly consistent, they should yield approximately the same amount of power. The difference in those two panels, one being 20, one being 15, is the actual size or dimensions, the footprint. So the 20% efficient panel is probably only 75% of the footprint relative to the 15% efficient panel. They should both generate the same amount of power. So efficiency is a metric of power per square foot, not yield. Important, but easy, higher the better. Anything over 20% is pretty good. Now, we also go to that warranty, which I had discussed previously here, which is 80%. Year 25 was for many years the industry standard. Over the last 5 to 10 years, that's changed. We are currently at 92%. However, there's two parts to a solar panel warranty. Another one is workmanship, also known as a product warranty. I call it a cosmetic warranty because that's really what it's going to translate into. If the panel is producing electricity just like the peers, but this panel happens to have a bowing of the frame, a discoloration, a bubbling in this back sheet, which is the white sheet on the back of this, you know, that's something wrong with that solar panel, but maybe it's generating electricity. If your product warranty is expired, if you don't have it, can't help you. If you do have it, that is a product warranty coverage thing. So it's really cosmetic. So that's the other part. Generally, you find those at 10, 12, and 15, with some increasing like us is we're now 25 to match it, but that's because Panasonic is backing our system with a special warranty. But there are higher and varying levels of that. So we want to make sure that we also look at that. Most people just gravitate to the linear degradation, which is going to vary amongst different panels. So that's one of the key things that you want to key in is how well does it produce power throughout its lifespan. And you know, with that one, it's of course higher percent, the better. Labor and shipping is also something that's included. But this next one here, temperature coefficient, boy, is this important. And boy, is this the most complex metric of a solar panel. So, you know, solar water, they love high heat, right? That's the hot hose effect. That's the hot car effect. The sun hits it, it heats it up. Solar water is generating electricity. If anybody knows a little bit about electricity, electronics and heat generally are just not friends of each other. And that's also true with solar panels. Problem is, these solar panels live on a roof in Tucson, Arizona. A byproduct generating electricity is a little bit of heat, and a byproduct living on a roof also heat. So it's very common that you can see these things rise, you know, especially on these hot summer days, in excess of 150 degrees. I don't know how accurate it is, but I have one of those thermometers you squeeze the trigger on, and it read 162 in one of the hot days last year when I actually took a reading off the side of one of my solar panels. That's a lot. Now, under these data sheets, this standard test condition, they are standard testing them, among other things, at 25 degrees Celsius, and that's about 77 degrees Fahrenheit. There's a big clip between 77 and 150. So the question is, well, in these hot summer days when we are using electricity and we are counting on this thing to crank out electricity, what's it doing at 150? Well, that's where the temperature coefficient comes into play. And because we're in a hot environment out here, it's a more critical metric here than it would be, say, in Minnesota, Seattle, something like that. So the long version is, well, you take the difference of the temperature, 77 to 150, you got to rotate that back to Celsius because it's a Celsius metric. And a temperature coefficient is a multiplier to tell you your expected losses. So you would rotate it back to Celsius, and then it's either, let's say, 315, 425, 258. Those are different coefficients, different panels that you would find out there. And that would tell you your expected losses when you do that number. Notice it is a negative number because it's a negative number and we are losing power. Now, that's complicated. You don't have to retain that. The easy way to look at a temperature coefficient is look for the negative number. And the smaller that negative number, the better performance in high heat you're going to get. And to me, given our geographic location, this is probably one of the most critical metrics of a solar panel, among other things. It's an all things considered thing, but lower the negative number, the better performance in high heat. It's also where Panasonic is one of the leaders in the industry. There's another close one known as SunPower, but that's a little bit more of an expensive panel. Degradation listed right there is just reverse mapping. Now, if you look at the dimensions there, in the solar panel industry, there is not a consistent size of solar panels. When I got into solar 12 years ago, there was a little bit more consistency.
Turn that off. That's yours.
Sorry, guys. It's potentially spam. So there, now it's on silent. All right, thank you. Sorry. When I got into the industry, there was a little bit more consistency in the dimensions of solar panels. They generally counted them as 60 cell, 72 cell, 140 cell, and they were usually about 40 inches wide, and they would grow in height profile, a little over 60 inches, 78 inches, and then these huge ones that are generally looked or utilized in the utility scale industry, where they have acres and acres and big panels are not an issue. Sometimes in the residential applications, it's effectively paying Tetris on somebody's roof, right? Because there's architecture, you got to fit them in there. You would think that we have this big, huge roof, but we also have to have setbacks for access paths. Anytime there's a peaked roof, we have to provide an access path to the top. We have to stay off the very peak of the solar panel, or I'm sorry, the roof, because if there is a fire in the house, on peaked roofs, fire departments ventilate the roof so we don't have a backdraft scenario when they go to actually extinguish the fire. So there's not always the same amount of square footage that we would assume just by looking at a house. Plus there is chimneys, vents, pipes, things that can cause shading. Some of them expel heat. You definitely want to stay away from that kind of stuff. But the point I'm making here is that solar panels are not created equal in terms of dimensions. So when somebody says, I've got solar, and they say, I have 20 solar panels, I'd say, that's fantastic. You just told me you have a car. We all have cars, right? If you want to tell somebody how big your solar system is, tell them how many watts there is, because a watt is a standard unit of measurement. So you would say it's either a watt. Once they reach 1,000 watts, we are now kilowatts. That's how you describe a solar system, kilowatt rating. Generally speaking, they show up around 3.5 kilowatts, and boy, do they rise to 20 or 30 in the residential world for really big power users. Most of us are somewhere around 8 to 10, but saying most of us is kind of a hard thing to quantify. Nobody's equal, right? So solar systems are scalable in terms of watts, not necessarily panel count. That's not the proper way to look at it. Which is why I point out the dimensions, because some people think that maybe if I have a 500 watt panel, it's better than a 300 watt panel. Or you can use any quantity of watt analogy. But that's not always the case. Sometimes you just have a bigger panel. And if you look at where really big panels and high watt panels come from, it's usually a utility scale application. And if you go back to these data sheets and you look at the efficiency degradation, you might find that these really big panels aren't so impressive after all, even though they have a big watt tag on them. So it's not necessarily the watts. Next slide, please. There it is. So this is how you can quantify a solar panel. You can set them side by side. Google has all the data sheets on there. You want to find the data sheet and the watt class of the panel you got. You want to look at the efficiency, the degradation, temperature coefficient, country of origin is often very important to people in the residential world. So I want to avoid the Chinese stigma, but I always say pause right there. Yes, you're definitely going to want to look at the technology. You're going to want to look at the panel. But you always want to zoom back out, because if your solar panel is 10% better and your system cost went up by 50 or 200%, you just bought technology. You didn't actually buy value. And as consumers, we are often looking for value in our purchases, right? Which we call the price to performance. What do you pay for this system and what does it do for you? And is that in line with your goals? And that generally is a catalyst for adoption, right? If it meets the goals, then we would adopt it. If it doesn't, then we don't. So that is what we look at in solar panels. All things considered though, you got to look at the price, and price to performance is not a metric you would find on a data sheet. There's a lot of different options out there. There's thousands of manufacturers. Some are better than others, okay? Now, let's go to the utility side of things. Can you give me the generic one? There's 2 slides here.
It's back, right?
Yeah, yes, it's 2 more slides back. So 1 more back. Okay, let's talk about how solar works, because I'm not necessarily talking about the classroom. Everybody in this area is from this community, which means you're all on TEP's rate plans, right? So how does it work with TEP is kind of where the rubber meets the road. So we had a rate structure change in 2017. If those of you have had solar for 8 or 9 years, it works differently for you than it would for new adopters. Fortunately, the old rate structure is just not available, so let's not really talk about it. That's something we call net metering. It's no longer available in any part of Arizona. We are now on what is commonly referred to as the export rate structure. TEP calls it an RCP, which which is Recovered Cost Proxy is what that stands for. Whatever. Let's talk about how it works. So there's three primary components to any solar system. And one is obviously the solar panels. These produce energy when sunlight hits them, and it's direct current energy. We operate on alternating current energy. So the other primary component is the inverter. These are two things you want to spend a little time looking at. These days, there's really two competing technologies. I say it's a two-horse race and both horses are winning. One is a little bit better than others in my opinion, but if you ask my wife, I got a lot of opinions that aren't that great. So anyway, we have a solar system installed on a house, panels, a racking system that affixes it to the roof, and an inverter that converts it from direct current to alternating current. We've all heard converter, inverter, DC to AC, converter, AC to DC. Right, so we have a system inverter, sunlight shows up in the morning and the system turns itself on and then produces power proportional to the amount of electricity, the amount of sunlight it's getting. Now power goes through these panels, down through the inverter, making it usable energy, and then it's connected at your main service panel, where it becomes the primary power source during daylight hours. You do literally go panel to appliance. It produces power proportional to the amount of sunlight it gets. So generally that's a ramp up to midday and a ramp down into the evening hours. Now, after power flows through that inverter and it goes into the house, one of two things is going to happen to it. Number one, panel to appliance. If you have anything on, it is literally powered by solar and it does not discriminate. It could be a clock, it could be a cable box that's not even on, it could be your electric vehicle charger, your air conditioner, pool pump, etc. And when you do that, when you go panel to appliance, the value associated is essentially what TEP would have charged you for that electricity. But it doesn't flow through their meter. They don't see it. It doesn't happen. The value is avoided cost. So about 15 cents plus or minus, right? Now, on the other side of that coin, you might not be home. Air conditioners are not 24/7 on. They cycle on and off, even when it's really hot. You know, it's going to be different the way you use power on a Monday compared to a Sunday. And that's going to change seasonally as well. Some of us are snowbirds, right? So what happens when we produce electricity, but we don't consume it instantaneously? It has to go somewhere. So really there's two options. You can put it in a battery that allows us to store it, consume it into the evening. It also gives us some rate structure advantages. It gives us the ability to have backup power in the event of an outage. That is a scalable situation. A battery is not going to power your entire house. Multiple batteries and multiple inverters definitely will. And then there's a lot more that we look at. I'll speak to that maybe later on, or we can do that in Q&A. But if you don't have a battery to store it or self-consume it, with our utility rate structure, we sell it. And we sell it at a predetermined rate known as an export rate. So they have a compensation rate they give you. A big misconception is that they buy it off at wholesale rates. Wholesale rates are a fraction of a cent, depending on the time of day or time of year, might be up at 1 or 2 cents. It's not giving you wholesale rates. They're also not giving you retail rates either. Unfortunately, the utilities need a win too. They give you an export rate, which is why we call it the export rate structure. Currently with TEP, it's 7.81 cents. So if we're rounding about 8 cents, that's a little over half of the retail value that they would sell it to you for. And the way that it works is anytime we produce electricity, we don't have a battery and it flows in reverse onto the grid. The meter is essentially spinning it backwards. If it were an analog, it's digital. So they're just recording that power. And when you get your bill at the end of the month, it shows your connection charge and taxes, power they delivered to you on a tiered basis. There's also time of use involved there. And then they have a new line item and it says excess generation credit. It has a meter read number for what you sent to the grid. And then they apply dollar amounts to the bill on a monthly amount based upon how much you sent them. And at the bottom of the bill, after all the taxes and surcharges, you either owe them money or you don't owe them money. Now, it's important to look at solar on a calendar basis because we are sunlight dependent and we have varying levels of sunlight. You know, you start off the year in January and 5 days before that is the 26th, which is the winter solstice. That's our shortest day of the year. Oftentimes we do heat with gas out here, which makes it a little bit more palatable, but sometimes we have all electric. Either way, December and January are generally your two low months of solar production, but generally also they're a lower consumption in terms of utility as well. Then you age into your first shoulder season, which generally runs for solar February, March, April, May, and sometimes into June, where we have longer and longer amounts of daylight. Heat is slowly rising, but over the last month or two, we really haven't been running our air conditioners at a high level relative to what we will be running on for the next couple of months here once it starts to, eclipse 100 degrees. So what you generally see, depending on your system size, because system sizes do vary, roof square footage, budgets, all these things go into how big of a system, did you oversize it? But nonetheless, it's very possible to have negative bills with TEP. In other words, you might sell them $125 worth of electricity, they sell you $100. And so the following month, it just looks like you've overpaid your bill. So when they buy this out monthly, they credit the account in dollar amounts. And that dollar amount does not discriminate where it goes. It goes against nighttime power consumption, it goes against connection charge, and it goes against the taxes that are built into our bill. And we either owe them or don't owe them at the end of the bill cycle. And the solar generation and the consumption are going to be the two variables. So it's very common that you might see negative bills for several months as we lead into the summer months. Now, early in the summer is actually the best solar production season, right? Days are now at their longest. Monsoons generally are the second half of the summer, not the first half of the summer. Now, air conditionings do come online here, not already. It's not too far out. So early in the summer, sometimes is a wash. Sometimes you add some money to the account. Sometimes you pull some money out. It really just depends on how big your solar system is relative to how much power you're using, and sometimes what the weather patterns were at that point in time. Now, the rubber tends to meet the road towards the end of the summer. And at the end of the summer, we have summer solstice pass. Days are going to get shorter. It's still very hot, right? And seasonal monsoons are going to show up. And whether or not it actually rains, cloud cover pretty much has the same effect. It inhibits some of the sunlight, production starts to dip, but power consumption is generally high. So sometimes what happens is we build up dollar credits on our bill. We get through the early part of the summer, and then we get to the end of the summer, and we might run an inverse relationship to that analogy I just gave. Instead of selling 125 and buying 100, you might be buying 125 and selling 100, right? So if that's the case, if you have dollar amounts remaining on your bill, they will pull from that prior to you actually having to outlay and pay a bill. Can I get the next slide, please? Yep. There's more details to this rate structure. So time of use. Time of use is an available rate plan, whether or not you have solar. It's a requirement when you have solar, but it's actually not the worst thing in the world here. Most people would actually save a little bit of money with it in general. So time of use, by definition, just breaks up the cost of electricity depending on when you buy it throughout the day. Generally speaking, because electric rates are higher in the summer and we use more power in the summer, we do generally focus on the summer time of use rate plan, which is 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Friday. And we're going to pay somewhere between 7 to 10% more for electricity during this period of time. It's also when we also use a lot of electricity because of the heat gain. Now, anyway, you would probably save some money with the time of use rate plan, whether or not you have solar, but it's a little bit more beneficial with solar because during 3 to 7 p.m. for a large part of the summer months, we still have some sunlight out, which means we are generating on site while we're not completely eliminating our on-peak power consumption. We are mitigating or reducing the amount of expensive power we buy. Now, anything outside of 3 to 7 p.m. Monday through Friday, so that's all weekends and all major holidays, and just again, outside of 3 to 7 p.m. is off-peak electricity. And off-peak electricity is discounted cost electricity. So when you have a solar system with this rate plan, generally speaking, the majority of the power you buy is off-peak power, making it slightly less expensive. That's only one side of the coin. There's two sides that help you out here. The other one is that no matter what rate plan you're on, it is a tiered rate structure. The more we use, the more we pay per unit of energy. And if you self-generate panel to appliance for between 6 and 11, 12 hours a day, depending on the time of the year, naturally, you're going to buy a lot less electricity. And when you buy less electricity, you have lower tiered electricity. So couple that with off-peak majority and lower overall consumption from the utility, it makes power we buy a little bit less expensive when you have a solar system in place. Now, once a year, because we don't use the same amount of power year over year, particularly with snowbirds, people that travel, and just changes in weather patterns and habits, who knows, we might have a pandemic that keeps us home, right? So once a year, at the end of October, they have what's called a true-up. A true-up is really just a settlement of the account financially. So If you have more than $10 in your account at the end of the October bill cycle, which is not always at the end of the October calendar month, bill cycle, if you have more than $10, they're going to settle it out. They'll move it to zero. They mail you what was in your account, snail mail as a check. Now, if you have between $0 and $10 with the solar system, nothing happens. If you have $3 or $8 in the account in November, you have $3 or $8 in the account. And if your account falls below zero on the credit side of things, you should pay that bill. So they do settle it up once a year. Now, currently their buyback rate is 7.81 cents. That is locked in and guaranteed for 10 years from when that system is placed into service, which is the day TEP puts the meter in. They refer to that as PTO, permission to operate. That is protected. What is not protected, however, is retail rates, right? If you don't have solar and they sell you power and they raise rates tomorrow, sorry, you got to buy that. If you have solar and they raise rates tomorrow, the power you're buying, sorry, you got to pay that amount. So we don't get special protections on the retail rate side. We have protections 10 years from the date the system's played into service. It cannot and will not change. After 10 years, it'll reset based upon market, most likely political conditions. Probably a little bit lower, but invaluable, no, definitely not invaluable. And battery technology is moving at rapid advancements. You can always retrofit a system with battery to store, self-consume, benefit of backup power. We don't know how stable our grid is going to be in 5 and 10 year clips. Examples are Texas, parts of California, PG&E, things like that we've all read about. We need some infrastructure improvements, and decentralizing our utility grid is a massive improvement. It's kind of like IBM, those commercials that say we're building the smarter this or that. A decentralized utility grid is much better than a centralized utility grid, which is what we have. We have central power plants, long distribution lines. For every kilowatt hour that we consume in our house, more was generated, depending on where you live. When you decentralize and when you have a solar system that produces electricity and you don't use it and it goes out, it's going to be absorbed within a square mile here. Your neighbors are going to use it. TEP is going to sell it at a full retail rate, but they get a win. The utility grid gets a win. It's renewable energy. There's no fossil fuel issues. And in Arizona, we use a lot of water generating electricity, but we have a lot of sunlight. So it's a win-win, as they call that. Now, that said, there is one charge that solar customers pay that people without solar do not pay, and that is a solar meter fee. If you look around your neighbors, around town, you'll notice that all these systems have one little meter on the side with a green ring around it. That is what we call a total generation meter. In other words, it starts from zero and it goes upwards. TEP charges you for that. It's $2.23 a month. Now, when you move to the time of use rate plan, there's actually a $3 discount on the connection charge. If you're on standard residential one, which historically most of us have been on, it's $13. So 13 goes down to 10 and you add the 223. In my opinion, that's somewhat of a wash. Unless you're already on time of use, then you just have a $2.23 higher connection charge. Is $13 or $12.23 or $10 the actual cost to be connected to the grid? It is not. There's taxes and surcharges. If you leave for a month and turn your breaker off, you're still getting a bill. And generally speaking, it's about $20 when you add up the little taxes and stuff. Now, TEP is a very complex utility bill and very hard to understand, but some of the taxes that are built into it are usage-based. When you eliminate the usage via solar, you've also eliminated the taxes. Some of them do not go anywhere. So what do we pay to be connected to the grid? $20, $21 a month, generally speaking. With the solar system, you get to see how you use electricity. Mark, would you mind moving to the, kill the presentation and take up the monitoring system?
Okay.
So I'm going to show you how it looks like, kind of how it looks like in real time with the solar system. Hit exit or escape. Skip it. We'll get this up here in a moment, but all right. It was my browser on the bottom down there. There it is. Okay. So this is actually my house. I live on the east side of Tucson, Spawn, if you're familiar. I think Mark's going to hit reload for us here. Super strong. As you can see, my family has participated in my business. All right, so this is the monitoring systems they come with. They do come with something called consumption metering these days. Not every system has it, but as a company, we deploy it standard. So What we're looking at is 3 boxes at the top. Since it's a little blurry, I'll just point out what they are. At the very top left, you have energy produced today. So far, my system looks like it's kicked out about 27 kilowatt hours. Energy this month is just shy of 1,000 at 993, and then the lifetime energy is a clip over 56,000. I've had this house for about 3 years on it. Now, directly below that is real-time meter. So with the solar system, you're able to see how you're using power and what the relationship is with the grid, your solar system, and your house. So currently, we're seeing that my system's generating 11,390 watts, and my house is using a whopping 1,660 watts. This isn't real time. Things do move around. Things come on, things go off. And currently I'm exporting to the grid at a rate of 9.75 kilowatts per hour. So I'm actually selling electricity to the grid. Now you can look at your air conditioner, your electric vehicle charger, different things come on, go off. There's always something which we call base load. That's your refrigerator running. And things that are just going to be always using electricity. So it looks like my house is a little bit above base load. Something must be on. Systems hanging out around 11,400 watts, and we're still exporting power. So that's pretty good. We would expect to see that. Can you scroll down a little bit more?
Yeah.
Look at that time-based graph, and then go to yesterday, please, down at the bottom there. So weather data shows up on the right because systems do have a relationship with the weather. When it's cloudy or things like that, they're not going to produce as much energy. Luckily in Arizona, we got pretty mild weather patterns and produce a lot of juice. So this is yesterday. I have an electric vehicle that uses a bunch of power, especially when I drive around a lot, which is what I do. Yesterday was a high use day. And you can see at the top, there's 2 boxes. It looks like, it's hard for me to even see this, but this top box on the left is your system production. So it shows what is your solar generating. On the right, you have consumption. Consumption is what are the power you consume, right? So system reflects sun up to sundown, because that's when solar operates. Consumption is 24/7 rolling clock. Hey, all right, that got a lot better. You guys did good. That's like the highest use I've seen after Easter. Jesus. Okay, didn't expect that. Anyway, so you see the system produced energy. It produced 100 kilowatt hours, and one of 2 things happens to it. It happened at about a 50-50 clip for me yesterday. So half of it was blue. That's self-consumption. That's panel to appliance, and that's avoided cost value. On the other side of that, when you produce it and you don't consume it, if you don't have a battery, you export it, sell it to the grid. And then at nighttime, when sunlight is not present, you're importing. So when you get a bill, it's going to show 2 things on it, not 3, which is what this shows. It's not going to show self-consumption. The self-consumption that happens behind the meter. TEP cares about 2 things. What can they sell you? That's red. What did you sell them? And who owes who money on a monthly basis, right? So that's what it looks like. Mark, can you show us a month?
Yes.
Tab up there. Nope, up at the top.
Okay.
There we go. All right, so this is so far this month. See, that's a very high day yesterday. So we can see that the system's generated about 1,000 kilowatt hours so far this month. Looks like 42% of that has been consumed on site, and 575 kilowatt hours has been sold to TEP, and I have purchased about 462 kilowatt hours. Now, if you really want to dial this in, this does have a bill cycle tab, because we have to remember that TEP bills don't follow calendar months. It could be the 3rd through the 5th. So if you'd like to do that, if you're into building spreadsheets, there's a CSV tab up at the top. And then at the very top, there's a reports tab. You can get different PDF, things like that out of it. If you scroll down, there's comparative energy. So you can see how the system generates month to month. So we'll have different levels of monsoons. That does have a variable in the system right there. You can look at it quarterly, yearly. This is what's called the dashboard. This is also available whether you have an iPhone or an Android as an app. And the good thing is, stuff we deploy, it is free of charge, unless you would like us to use a cellular card and not connect it to your home's internet service. In that case, it is a subscription. It's about 5 years for a little over $300. Most people just plug it into their internet. If you scroll up and go to the layout view, please. The other thing that comes standard with all systems is what we call module level insights. This has not always been available. When I got into solar, there was something known as a string inverter. A string inverter was generation 1 technology, where we took, say, 20 panels and wired them into 2 groupings in series, so positive to negative. And essentially 10 panels became one panel to that inverter. It didn't know if it was 10 or 12 or 15 panels. It knew it was volts and amps and it was going to manage to that. The problem with that original technology is if one got shaded or one failed, it was like the old Christmas light effect was the common analogy given. And with that, you would have interrupting a circuit cause voltage drop, and it was catastrophic for our production. Now, microinverters came online where they digitized and miniaturized the inverter, and they put one per panel, and each panel became its own independent power generator. It was fantastic, except for early microinverters, one of the most reliable thing in the world. So they've grown up, they've gotten a lot better. And then generation 3 technology came out, and that is what's called Solar Edge. It's also known as DC Optimized, where they basically took the best of those two previous technologies and married them together. So that's what I have here. That's what Solar Edge is, the monitoring. The inverter manufacturer provides this platform with the systems, and it is also module level. So in this one, they all have something known as a DC optimizer. It makes them independent. They harvest power independently, and it's still centrally converted with an inverter. It is better for battery integration, which I'll talk about here in a little bit. But this is the panels as they live on the roof. As you can probably tell, I don't have a great roof for solar. My largest array of solar panels actually faces to the northwest, which is not where the sun shines. But in the summer months, it doesn't really discriminate all that much, the clip between the two. When the sun is lower in the horizon in the winter, it starts to underperform in that roof. But hey, it was a bigger roof and needs a lot of juice in my house. This is the daily view when you first pop it open. So you can see that there's a color coding associated with them. That array right there is southeastern, that's southwestern, and that's northwestern. So if we pause at whatever time we're at today, 10:30-ish, the southeastern array is going to be the higher performing array once we get through the full day. Can we change the view up at the top up there from daily to, let's do weekly. And so now you'll see the color code is going to level out. It'll be a little bit different amongst the different panels, but they're pretty consistent because the sun does hit east and west roofs pretty equally if we have that, right? So it does level out throughout the day. It's just when you pop it over to the daily view, obviously, we're not finished with the day. Now, on this particular platform, you're able to see what each individual panel is doing. If we can see it clearly, it would have the kilowatt hours per panel that they've generated. And there's a color code associated with them. If one stops performing, it'll look black, a little flag shows up depending on what the reason is. If it gets darker, it's probably just one of two things that can affect the solar system that aren't necessarily error codes associated with equipment issues or failures. Those two things are one, soiling, which is not always just a thin layer of dust that accumulates. It could be bird shit, right? We can do something about that, or we could wait for the weather. The other thing that can happen to the solar system that's not error code related is shading, right? Shade happens. So my house actually has that. I have a 2-story house with triangular roofs up at the top, and this is on my garage. We're able to see that a little bit better. You're going to see that panel is underperforming compared to other panels that are in the same orientation. It's also a darker color code, and the reason why is because it gets shaded. Can you cue up playback to the left there? Now, it's going to be a little bit harder to see, but once that launches and then press play, the other way you can look at this is in real time. So you're able to see the house, wake up and go to sleep. We'll be able to see the sun will hit it on that side first. It lights up the other side, back side of the house, rounds out the day. So you can watch your system perform throughout the day. Nice insights, cool to watch, way better than paint drying, but that is things you can do. And if you are able to see it, it might be a little difficult. You'll see in the afternoon that you'll see the shadow hit it there and then kind of spread over to the other panels. That's because the house is shading the array on a daily basis. So we're able to see what's going on. We won't have him do it, but if you right-click any of the panels, there's analysis. You can see voltage, amperage, error codes, issues. You can run charts. So you'll be able to see that that panel that is the darker performer is fine until all of a sudden it kind of falls off the map and produces significantly less because it's partially or fully shaded. And then you can chart another panel right next to it. And you'll see that it extends towards the end of daylight hours before it falls off. So that tells us right there it's shaded. If something happens bad on the panel, we get a warranty claim. We look at the voltage curves, different things on that. That's what shows up. One of the benefits is since the technology has increased, when I was a technician, if somebody said there's an issue with that solar system, I would get a little multimeter and a ladder, and I'd go out there and I'd be tearing into the system, probing and taking readings and figuring it all out and compiling a report. And I'd have to, submit that report, get it fixed, and then come back and replace whatever component it was. These days, I just do it here, and it's a one-stop service call, which is nicer for both of us long term. But that is some of the insights of the solar system there. And if you go back to the dashboard and change the name, you can type in, let's do Winters. So under that magnifying glass up at the top left where it says Shepherd's
Okay.
Crown, once you click that, it'll drop open, type in Winters. I don't have a budget for a battery. I'm in line, but lower priority. I'll show you, we can incorporate batteries to the system. Batteries, why there's a lot of different brands, composition, and boy, is that a long conversation to have. I'll tell you the basis. It's either what we call AC coupled or DC coupled batteries. DC coupled is better because solar panels produce DC electricity. So microinverters was the previous, head honcho of inverter technology. They incorporate batteries on what's called AC coupled architecture. So with the microinverter, you go have a DC solar panel, micro, miniature, living on the back of the inverter, converts it to alternating current there. Now, if you incorporate a battery into that system, you must AC couple. So that means that it comes off, goes DC panel, AC off the back, AC downstairs. Now we put a battery in, AC goes to DC for storage because batteries are DC. And then when we need it, we invert it back to alternating current. Now, SolarEdge can also do that. This is a DC coupled architecture right here. You can see that the battery is already full on this particular system, but it goes DC panel. There's a DC optimizer, which is a panel level harvesting and insights. But when we incorporate a battery into these type of systems, it goes DC off the roof into the battery DC, and it gets inverted once for use. So among other things, when we look at battery systems or battery integration, we look at something called a round trip efficiency, because you don't get out what you put in, right? DC coupled architecture is a little bit better. Both of them are prevalent in the market. Personally, I think that SolarEdge is a winning technology because of this, and I think the future, maybe more like 5 to 10 years out, will eventually have battery attachments once the cost comes down and technology improves slightly more. Technology has really jumped over the last 2 years with this. So we can do batteries. There's another thing called a smart EV charger. So fallacy of an electric vehicle, they don't charge up as quick as a gas station pump, does it? Right? We're 5 minutes to 500 miles of range at a gas station. We're several hours with an electric vehicle. So charge rate. One of the cool things is that you can have a electric vehicle charger that ties right into the system to charge your electric vehicle. At any point in time, it's a level 2 32 amp charger, which generally translates somewhere around 40 miles an hour of charge, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on the actual vehicle. But if sunlight is present, it has something called solar boost mode, which actually increases the charge rate by 25%, 25% faster charge rate. You can charge directly off the sun as well as the grid simultaneously, reducing charge times. Also, there's settings like I only want to charge my car with sunlight, things like that you can do. That's way cool. Drops right in. You've got multiple profiles for different vehicles. Things are being able to be integrated into solar systems, including the batteries. This system here also has what's called a generator interface, because if you have an extended outage with inclement weather, solar might not work that well. So you can incorporate a generator in there. It has 2-wire auto start capability, which means the solar system owns the generator. And once the batteries get low charge, comes back online and charges the batteries and then turns it off again. We're going to have bidirectional EV soon. So that means we can take the batteries of the cars and use that in our home system with different things. This one already has weather integration in it. So if you allow for push notifications on your phone or app, if a storm is coming, you can say, I don't want to discharge any of my battery. If you scroll down here under the daily, change the view to daily and scroll down a little bit, please. Keep it going, keep it going. Let's go look at a previous day. There's a line there that's the state of charge. That's where, just on the right, or that'll work too. Let's do that. So you can see that once you have a battery, you use next to no utility power, right? That system generated 95 kilowatt hours yesterday, charged up the batteries. You use 0.16 unit of energy. That's just trickling in and out. So clearly you're very independent. They have what's called a state of charge. You keep a reserve level. Here you can keep 20%, 50%, whatever. Most of the time when batteries are in service, they charge up, and once the sun sets, it takes over the house so that it doesn't pull from the grid until it reaches its reserve limit, which is the amount of power you're keeping at all times in the event of an outage. Now, if storms are coming in the monsoon season and it sends you a push notification, there's a slider on the app and you can keep it at 20%, 50%, you can keep it at 100% for the event of an outage. That's some of the features that are available. They also tie into something called SPAN, which is a smart home panel. That's another conversation, but that allows for full automation. It also ties into Alexa. Point here is the future of solar is really becoming very rounded out. It's not just grid interactive solar. It's grid interactive solar, it's batteries, it's EV chargers, generators, smart home technology. And the last thing is thermal storage, which sometimes we can install a secondary hot water tank that feeds the primary. Sometimes primaries accept 2 heating elements. So whether we have gas or electric, doesn't matter. Once your batteries are charged, you can divert some of that electricity before selling it to the utility company and increase the temperature of your hot water tank. Therefore, your element, gas or electric, works a lot less harder into the night when the solar is not functioning. Point here is that they're all tying into each other for the future of solar. And it's got good savings on it there too. So that is the monitoring system, kind of what it looks like. Talked a little bit about the utility bill there. Let's see, we discussed panels, we discussed inverters. This is the monitoring, kind of the future of solar there. I don't really know of anything necessarily that I want to cover at a high level, and I know I have a timeline budget that I tend to go over anyway. So I can talk your ear off, but I'll spare you. I'll just go ahead and say, at this point, does anybody have any questions or anything that you would like me to cover? Just mind.
Is it possible to get a very small battery with only the kind of
Yes. Yes, yes. So battery systems in and of itself are scalable, just like solar panels, right? You could have a very small solar system and that's still going to give you beneficial. It's just proportional. You can have a smaller battery or you can have full house backup. So in the battery world, when we sell a battery system, there is what we call grid arbitrage, which does not give backup power. That's just an inverter and a battery attached to each other. It'll charge up and discharge into the evening. But when the grid goes away, that's a grid interactive battery system. You need something called, there's really 2 things that allow us to decouple in the event of an outage. Currently, it falls under a piece of equipment that is named the backup interface, but really, we need a transfer switch. You have to isolate from the grid in the event of an outage. Oftentimes in the Midwest, you see these associated with generators, and there's really 2 types. There's a manual transfer switch, right, which you throw the handle, it isolates. Now you're on generator, you fire that up, you power the house. And then there's an automatic transfer switch, which works on a similar principle as a doorbell. It sees the voltage, it's here. The moment it goes away, it clicks over, and so it's very fast. And then you are isolated, and once the grid comes back, it re-clicks over that way. So we use an automatic transfer switch. The other thing that is needed in the off-grid world is something called an auto transformer. It's a little bit complicated. So let's say we have a 10 kilowatt hour battery and it has a 5,000 watt continuous rating. Well, we operate on a 2-leg system, 240 volts, right? So that's our air conditioners, but also on our outlets, those are 120. Well, if you have 5,000 watts of continuous power in backup mode, really what you have is 2,500 leg 1, 2,500 leg 2. So let's say the power goes out and you want to cook some lunch. You fire up the toaster, the microwave, and the blender, all at the same time. You can easily exceed 2,500 watts. And without an auto transformer, that's a problem. Click goes the system. An auto transformer, what that allows it to do is share power amongst 2 legs, right? So one leg, the kitchen, those outlets might be using 4,000 watts, and the other leg could have 1,000. So an auto transformer allows it to share. Those 2 things are critical. 1, you got to isolate. 2, you got to be able to share power amongst the legs. Other things we look at in the battery integration world is continuous power rating. Most of us on these houses around here have a 200 amp service. Volts times amps is watts, and 200 amps at 240 volts, 48,000 watts. That's a whole lot of juice, which is why we never see main breakers trip on houses for the most part. Well, when the grid goes away, you don't have 200 amps, right? You have an inverter and a battery, and it's really the lowest rating of the 2, lowest common denominator. Generally, they start off at 5,000 watts historically, although the newest technology now that we deploy with the entry-level battery system is 7,000 watts continuous. The other thing we look at is peak or surge rating, because we have to turn things on, particularly air conditioners take a lot of juice to turn on. Sometimes we call that LRA or lock rotor amperage, surge, right? And they take a lot of juice to turn on. So we look at a continuous rating, a peak rating. We also look at the kilowatt hour storage. Currently, we deploy 16 kilowatt hour batteries and we stack them so we can put multiple in there. But if you have, 2,000 watts on your house, you would have 8 hours of power, right? Move that down to 1,000, you have 16 hours of power. Start using 5,000 watt air conditioners, you got 2.5 hours, right? So sometimes we use different amounts. So yes, you can put in a single battery. Generally speaking, when we have more of an entry-level system, we create what's called an essential load panel. So we go out to your main panel where all your circuit breakers out, and we pick out what is essential. What is essential is generally we start with the refrigerator and deep freezers, right? We don't want our food to spoil in the event of an outage. Second to that, we want our internet service provider, cable and TV so that we can get some info, right? And then also we want to be able to just generally operate. So we want the lights for the kitchen, the bathroom, maybe the living room, maybe the hallway. So a couple light circuits. We need a couple outlets to be going for that internet service provider, charge our phones, get by. What we're not putting on there is definitely not air conditioners. It's too much juice. They need dual inverters to really power that up. So our entry-level system is a single battery, essential load panel, something called a backup interface, which allows us to isolate off the grid. And that's how we go. Then we scale up. Now we've got dual batteries. We've doubled our storage capacity. We've increased our continuous power rating and our peak power rating with that. And in those dual battery systems, generally we can supply power for maybe a portable swamp cooler, window air conditioner, things like that. And then they get big. Dual inverter, multi-batteries, full on backup. That's what that thing is right there. Decouple and stay decoupled if you want to. Okay, I'm sorry, next question.
So the electric cars, you have a DC coupled battery?
That is a neighbor of mine. I have batteries in the pipeline, but I'm pretty much the lowest priority.
Okay, so for the future, so think about the life of this 25 years, like the cars probably have one in less than that.
Sure.
The battery to charge that, what type of battery is recommended? When you go and you plug your car in, okay, you want to make sure the next day it's 100% charged.
Mhm.
You said entry-level battery. What are the battery ranges? And what are the battery ranges in cost too? So there's two components to this. There's the panel, right? And then there's the battery, right?
And the inverter and how you're coupled.
Okay, so those two things are major cost components.
Yeah.
And the higher watts per battery, or the higher the cost.
Typically, we measure batteries in kilowatt hour, which is
Okay.
how much juice you can put in there. They generally run from 10 to 16 these days. LG is what we use. It's kind of the latest and greatest. It's 16 kilowatt hours. Historically 10. We might have heard of the Tesla Powerwall. That's a 14 kilowatt hour battery. So we look at kilowatt hours, depth of discharge, which is how much of that power can we use, continuous power rating and surge rating. Generally speaking, batteries are sold on a cost per kilowatt hour basis. So you get a bigger, higher capacity battery, you pay more.
And so would the battery be able to charge the electric car as well as other components?
Yes.
In the house?
Yeah, it doesn't discriminate. It's all electricity, right? So it doesn't discriminate where it goes. Pretty soon, bidirectional EV is going to come online. So in the events of outage, you can utilize not only your home battery, but your electric vehicle as well. You're seeing that advertised with the Ford Lightning. Things like that.
Are the Panasonic panels, and batteries, are they are they made in the United States or are they overseas?
No, everything's global. Even the American-made solar panels, it feels good to buy American. You're not buying American, man. That's not how this works. It's assembled in America, but cell production is really only out of 3 sites. There's a big trade war that's happening with China and skirting the solar tariffs. My opinion as a advocate of solar and not an advocate of what China does is we absolutely need to stop tariffing the solar panels from China. That is stupid. We need to ramp up American manufacturing and we need to do that, but that is not a 1 year, 2 year thing. We're going to need some time to catch up and we should definitely support that. But tariffing Chinese solar panels is foolish. They were smarter than us in the solar industry and they are ahead of us, and rightly so. Now, that said, they do dumping. Dumping is not appropriate. So I don't want to really get too much into political conversations. I try to avoid that, sometimes better than others. But to answer your question on batteries, there's not actually a clear winner, because the other thing we look at on batteries is battery composition. They're all some form of, they call them lithium ion. They have a high level of nickel in them. Lithium ion is an easy way to describe it. Just so you know, they're not the batteries of the hippies in the woods, right? They're not golf cart batteries. Like a car battery, when it hits 80% of its capability, you need a new battery, your car stops starting. Lithium ion does not have that same thing. They degrade with time. They generally, without an external event, don't fail. So they have a very long lifespan, which is another question I get is, well, how long do they work once I make this major purchase? Well, in perpetuity, they just don't work as well in 20 years as they did their first 5 years, which is kind of the same with solar panels. They have a little bit of degradation.
They also have a 25-year warranty.
No, sir. They generally have a 10-year, 12-year warranty. And that's just seems to be consistent across the board. There's several major players of batteries. Generally, two winners are LG and Panasonic, with Tesla being third place, formerly first place.
How long have you been doing SunBright, and when did you get aligned with Panasonic then? What's the story on that?
SunBright, so I was an ownership member of another solar company here locally in town. I'm not going to say the name, but I was a minority owner. We started that 2008, 2009. And so we split in 2016 to start SunBright. And I had known a distribution rep who is a very high-level employee of Panasonic now. So I kind of had an in with them. Panasonic has always had a superior technology, but they didn't get their manufacturing scale going till 2015-ish. So they were always there, but generally very high cost. That changed. They were able to ramp up. So I've been a Panasonic installer. They rank them different level, authorized, premium, and we're now elite installer for, just say 5 years. Don't hold me to that. Other questions? Just to remember.
These, say I get your system and go with the entry level battery system. Is that then buy an electric vehicle a couple years from now? Is that original system, is that stackable? Can I just add another battery, plug in another battery?
Yes, go with limits. It depends on which battery we're using. Each inverter can generally hold 2 or 3. So there's limits to stackability. The inverter is another piece of specifications that we're going to look at. So once you get over 2 to 3 batteries, you probably want a secondary inverter to increase capabilities. The backup interface piece of equipment will support up to 3 inverters, and each inverter 2 to 3 batteries. By that time, you're running a hotel.
What's the typical dimension of these batteries, the entry level battery?
They're about 20 inches wide. So if we just estimate maybe a little under 2 feet wide, they stick out about a foot, and they stick up a hair over, I believe, 42 inches height profile. And that's for the larger of the 2 batteries. The other batteries are shorter, they're both equal dimensions. Batteries is the one thing that cannot live outside. Inverters can live outside, solar panels should live outside. Batteries currently need to be free from water intrusion and direct sunlight exposure. So gotta have a place for them. They don't have to be air conditioned. Garages, carports, common back patios, things like that.
You talk to us about leasing versus owning.
Yes, I can. So leasing, one time became a very relevant thing. And what happened with that is, I'm going to use the timeline of about 2013 to 2015. There's different entries into solar, right? You can buy it, you can pay cash. You can involve a bank, right? Banks have loans. There's solar-specific lending, which is generally a little bit longer term. There is points-based lending, which is to essentially prepay the interest and roll it into the loan. That is common in the solar industry because the tax credit is a percentage base. So if it costs $20,000, you could pay that. You could go to a loan and maybe get a loan from a local bank. I like to endorse Tucson Pueblo Credit Union. They have a solar loan program, but they're going to give you a FICO-based rate, so 5% on up with current interest rates these days. Or you could prepay all that interest, put it into the loan. Now, the cost of that $20,000 system might be 25, for example, but now it's a very low interest rate and a longer term loan, because one of the metrics that people look at when financing or leasing a system is savings. What do you pay, $100 versus what does it do? If it's $200, you would then have a 50% savings. So now you asked about
So the
leasing.
loan aspect is to allow us to buy it outright because you do an outside loan
Yes.
versus
Yes.
do you promote the leasing through Sunbright or?
I don't think leasing is appropriate for the vast majority of residential applications, and history has taught us about that. So what happened around 2012, 13-ish is that major leasing came online, particularly Solar City that was hanging out in all the Home Depots, SunPower, Sunrun, or some of the other names that got involved in that. And what they were doing at that point in time is they were saying, sir, you can buy this solar system and you can give us 20 grand. Or we'll give you a loan and it's got an interest rate and your payment's gonna be, for example, $100. Or you can lease it. We're gonna cover all of it, cover all the maintenance. It's 20 years, but your payment's $30, which at the time was the best financial move. So the vast majority of people for a short duration of time actually lease solar systems. And it seemed to be the best endeavor. Now there's an issue when you sell the home. If it's an owned system, it's a fixture of the house, it appraises, it has home value as such, it's a marketable thing. If it's a lease system, it is looked at in the appraisal world as not an asset, more of a liability because somebody else owns it. It has to be transferred in the event of a home sale. The new homeowner has to pass credit and acquire that, sign off on it. Now, anybody buying a house should be able to do that. That's not the issue. It just doesn't help in the value proposition of a house. But what was happening during that duration of time is that the leaseor, Solar City, for example, was saying, yeah, we'll sell it to them for 20 grand, but we're going to maintain it for 20 years. So when we go collect our tax credit, the value of the system is $60,000. And at the time, the tax credit was 30%, which was $20,000, plus they're collecting 30, 40 bucks a month from you. They won, you got the lowest cost of entry, you won. The loser was the government. And while they're not the brightest, they're not that dumb for that long. So what happened is they cracked down on leasers and how they value a solar system when they obtain these tax credits, because if you buy it, whether you buy it through financing or ownership, the tax incentives go to you. If you lease it, it goes to them, which is appropriate in some situations, particularly, in my opinion, churches, nonprofits, and those of us that don't have taxable liability. It doesn't need to be 98% of all solar systems deployed. That was not appropriate. And it's because they were scheming the government. And so the government cracked down on them. The cost of leasing went back up through the roof. And it's no longer, for the vast majority of us, the most best way to get into a solar system. So history has corrected that. And nowadays, the percentage of people leasing is pretty nil. We do it at a low level, but I mean, it generally is 3 to 5 people a year. It's pretty low. Yes, ma'am.
We did solar 5.5 years ago.
Uh-huh.
It was Solar City, it's Tesla.
Yeah.
And there was the talk then about leasing versus buying. And it was like, why do I want another monthly payment when the whole idea was to get rid of it? So we put a couple extra panels on so that over the course of the projected 25 years, we would never go under 100%.
Mhm.
And we talked to our financial guy, and he's a big solar guy. And he looked into it all and he said, you know what? You just pay for it outright. He said, in 7 years, you've recouped. Plus, we got a 7 grand tax thing. So I think it's the best thing.
Well, it's definitely changed with times. There was a time when I would have said, I think you should lease the system. You know, you got to look at what one is the alternative, what you're using and spending in electricity. And then you have a solar system, and then you have different potential points of entry, right? If you have cash is always king in many avenues. Buying a car, I mean, anytime you involve a bank or a third entity, somebody else's hand is in a cookie jar, right? Then is it a local bank, FICO based? Is it the point system that helps to subsidize the interest? Or is it the fact that, you know, Solar City at the time was gaming the system and, you know, being able to give you the better deal? Also, if you don't pay any taxes, tax credits have a very low value to you. There is not, I mean, leasing, you know, it has its pros and its cons, but we shouldn't make a judgment that it's not appropriate. For some people, it is the most appropriate and they should lease. Some people, if they have the ability to pay cash, that's great. Some people, they don't want to lose their cash, so they should finance, right? As long as it's better than the utility cost,
Right.
then, you know, it might be ideal.
All we pay now is we have between $20 and $22 a month to TDP.
So you have what we refer to as a net zero system, produce more than you consume. Since you got in 2015, you have the old rate structure known as net metering. Once a year, they settle up and at the end of October with you. But unlike for new customers, they do buy out your excess for wholesale rates and they don't send you a check, they credit your account in dollar amounts, right? So last year was actually the best buyback rate they've ever given, which was 2 cents per unit of
So will
energy.
ours stay that net metering forever?
No, net metering is 20 years. From
So
the data system.
we've only had 2 bills the whole time. The first year, we had a $50 bill only because we had put it in May and we didn't
Yeah.
generate enough. And then when we had to take them off last year and redo the whole roof, we had a small bill because we were
Yeah.
off. But otherwise, we've produced enough for everything.
So a lot of homes in Sunflower, you drive through the whole neighborhood, that one's having its roof redone, that one's having its roof redone, you know,
Yeah.
so. Because we're about 22 years in kind of thing for the neighborhood, and so. If Sunbright puts it on, but then the roof needs redone. Do they handle that, or tell us about how that works? Or do you want to get your roof redone?
We do
before you
it,
put on?
but it is not a free thing.
Oh, okay.
You know, it really depends on what happens with a roof. You know, they are on a rail system, so if we have a point issue, right? Like if we've got a valley that has, you know, a leak in it or something, and there's solar nearby, you can generally turn off the system, unscrew the things. They fit into usually a channel with a T-type bolt, so once it's torqued down, the T is sideways, it doesn't go anywhere. You can unscrew it, modularly take them off. You can service sections of roofs, do things like that. But the problem can become is that if water gets under the underlayment, so we have tile, we have a black underlayment, kind of like a felt paper, which has a weight grade to it, generally dictating lifetime. If water gets underneath that to the plywood and plywood becomes compromised, you need a real full-on new roof. And in that event, the entire attachment points need to be come off. If you're just refelting the roof, which is you know, getting a roof before we have failure of the roof, which is less intrusive, we can take off the conduit from point A to point B, the rails, the panels, leave the attachments, and they refelt over the top, restore the tiles. It is less expensive that way.
Actually, 2 questions for you. The first one is, I have a Tesla app. I like your dashboard. Can I get something like that? And the second question is TEP have a limitation on the number of solar systems that could be installed in, say, a certain area?
Okay, so TEP, okay, so Tesla, a lot of systems, especially during the net metering era, how you use power mattered a little less. So you have a production monitoring system, right? It shows what your system is doing as a whole. It's probably because Tesla deployed string inverters, you don't see panels either, right? And you don't see the house.
Right.
So there's a potential you could get that added through them. I would say that that's probably pretty low. There is third-party things that can do this stuff with or without solar. What we're using is something called a current transformer. We measure the current and we know the amps, volts, amps, current equals watts. So the energy detective is one. A quick Google search, you can retrofit your house with that and attach it to the solar. So you can get that features. Although I don't know about how you would integrate it with the Tesla app. You would have to ask them about that. Now that said, I am a Tesla contractor and we do debatably do some work for them. It is something that is now deployed, but it really wasn't deployed years. Even our old systems don't have that feature on it because net metering it didn't matter, it wasn't necessary. So yes, you can get it. What's the second question?
The TEP and the development, the number of houses with systems in a neighborhood.
There is some rules. There is the 20 kilowatt AC rule, which means your inverters need to be rated at 20 kilowatts. My house has an 11.4 kilowatt rated inverter. I have a 3,500 square foot house, dual air conditioners. I own 2 electric vehicles, 3 kids. I don't need that much. I mean,
Well, no,
boy,
I
you got to
mean,
get up there.
Like you, your neighbor, all your neighbors.
Okay.
You can
So what you might have heard of is saturation zones,
Yeah.
right? So about a year, maybe 2 years ago now, TEP decided after a ruling that they weren't very happy with the Arizona Corporation Commission, their regulatory body. Basically, the ruling was they wanted to streamline interconnection applications timelines amongst utilities, because certain utilities were taking a long time to approve something, or some were doing it quick, some were APS was making you wait 2 months after you're installed before they come put a meter in. They wanted to streamline that, and the utilities don't like being messed with. They are regulated by the Corporation Commission, which is an elected body. Sometimes it's pro solar, sometimes it's not. Really depends on who and how much money's flowing into different people's campaigns. But they got a little wind underneath them, and they decided that 16 areas of town were saturated with solar and that their grid couldn't support it anymore. This being one of them, left side of Twin Peaks Road. They wouldn't let you put solar in. All of a sudden, one day, zero announcement. Sorry, it's saturated. Now you can do a battery system, but you can't send any power back, which basically killed the market. So they took out Twin Peaks, all of Gladden Farms, all of Sahuarita, parts of Marion, Cleveland, off of in the Vale area, Rita Ranch as a whole. 16 major areas, and it just so happened that these 16 areas were probably the most high adoption rate areas. Now, solar does have an advocacy group, and we contribute to that, and so the lawyers got involved, and all of a sudden they went back and said, wait a second, we did a recalculation. It turns out only Gladden Farms is saturated, and then with some minor improvements, Gladden Farms is no longer saturated. So there is no saturation zones. There is some limits. 20 kilowatt AC is one of the limits, but by the time you reach anything over 12 kilowatts AC, we need to talk about your 200 amp service rated panel and upgrading that, which is often a cost without benefit. And by the time you're scaling that big, maybe you should look at reducing the amount of power you use. I don't know how big the houses are in this neighborhood, but generally, they're not over 6,000 square foot. There's other limitations that show up before that happens. There is transformers, and they do analyze transformers. I've had it happen once in the last year. That's in a community called La Instancia, which just has so much solar in it, where all the neighbors on one transformer had all put in massive solar systems, and they loaded the transformer. So one of our clients, unfortunately, we had to downsize his system enough so that we couldn't overload that transformer. I mean, he had the option of buying his own, but it's like a 12 grand deal. But that said, there's no longer a saturation zone. There's some limits. There's electrical code limits that, can dictate things that generally show up before that. Sir.
Does that mean you're not required to have a battery here anymore?
Nope, that all went away when they reanalyzed and magically found out that 15 of their 16 zones were actually
I was
saturated.
required to have a battery.
I'm really sorry about that, man.
But the battery died and they took it out, so I haven't got it back.
Sorry about that too.
So back on the tile roof
Yes, sir.
and replacement roof things, my house has the original tile roof, so underlayment, whatever. But the house has a bonus room on the back with flat roof.
Mhm.
So my thought is only put the panels on the flat roof. They can be on the structure. I can get underneath the white coat. They can be at the optimum angle. It's not going to be net zero. It's going to be some partial of that. Sure. What's the viability of that scenario?
Pretty viable. Solar systems in terms of cost are scalable, right? So if you buy 5 panels, the cost per panel is higher than if you buy 20 panels. So it's gonna have less of an effect, but like you said, on a flat roof, they breathe a little bit better, they generate more power, it just depends.
And just the Panasonic, when I was reading in the brochure about it, you can even get some bounce back underneath for. So that's an advantage, I guess, of having it elevated more.
Well, the bounce back that they're talking to is this thing called a back sheet. That's a white sheet. It's a reflective thing. Now you can buy all black panels too, and we changed the sheet to a black sheet. While it's prettier, I don't fully recommend it, because what happens when it's all black is it heats up a little bit better. Heat and solar panels are not friends of each other, but there is something called a bifacial panel where there is no back sheet. It's glass on glass. that's like we use those in like pergolas and some shade structures. It's aesthetic, the cost of entry is higher. So yes, it performs better, but does it equal that? Probably not.
So with less panels, as I'm further away from net zero, then there's less likelihood that a battery system would do any good for me then, right?
That's under criteria. If you need, I mean, if grandma's in the back room on oxygen, the benefit of a battery is a little bit different dynamic than savings, right? If you're a hunter with 5 deep freezers of food, you know, the dynamic is different. If you're a spreadsheet guy, it does this, you know, you're quantifying on financial number crunching, they're not on the same level. I mean, grid interactive solar systems, for one, the technology we use has a conversion efficiency of 99%. Batteries don't have that, right? We're losing 10% by cycling through batteries with a DC coupled system. AC coupled is even less. So, you know, it depends on your criteria of what is it, you know, what makes a battery adoptable or not. That said, battery technologies are increasing. For example, last year we were deploying an LG battery that was 10 kilowatt hours, but it wasn't 100% usable. You could use 9.3 kilowatt hours out of it. And it had a 5,000 watt continuous power rating. You could do spikes to 11,000. You could stack 2. That same battery this year is now rated 16 kilowatt hours, has a 7,000 continuous power rating with spikes to 11,000, and use 100% depth of discharge. So all 16 is available to you. That's a big jump, right? Unfortunately, they price batteries on per kilowatt hour. So while the performance went way up, the cost went up too, even though the cost per kilowatt hour did drop. Now, a couple more years of this innovation and with electric vehicles becoming more and more relevant, battery manufacturing coming online, I highly anticipate batteries will be much more advantageous in another 3 to 5 years than they are this year. So give it 10 years, it's going to be pretty much a staple of solar systems. That's an opinion because predicting into the future is a dangerous game. But that's that. To answer your question, sometimes it's just yeah, good. Yes, sir, in the back.
Speaking of saturation, about 10 years ago, our community was saturated with a lot of different solar companies here in Sullivan. Probably Center.
Yeah.
A lot of them aren't in business anymore.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened to the warranties, because I don't have a solar roof. But who guarantees your product's warranty, say, your business doesn't?
Yeah, I get that a lot. So it depends, right? I mean, it's kind of like if your air conditioning company goes out of business, right? If you bought I don't know, brand X and it has a manufacturer warranty and the installer goes out of business, the unit is still covered, but whatever warranty on labor that installer gave is not. So if my company goes out of business, which is a common question, our roof penetration warranty goes with it, right? Because Panasonic doesn't back our roof attachments, right? Now that said, Panasonic, they cover labor, shipping, degradation, workmanship. Something happens to your panel, so long as Panasonic is around, you're still going to be covered. And since they cover labor and shipping costs, it doesn't necessarily matter who services it. Now, the other major component is the inverter, right? And that is SolarEdge currently. That's an Israeli company. They do have a footprint in the United States, and they have a 25-year warranty. They cover labor and shipping too. So if we go out of business and the inverter dies, it should be good. If they go out of business, we got a problem. We have a default warranty in the event of either Panasonic or SolarEdge going out of business. We'll cover it for 12 years. But if everybody goes out of business, it sucks. Now, yeah, there's some installers, especially early installers, you know, we had this, when the solar industry kind of came of age, you saw, I'm getting the horn, aren't I, in the hook, okay. I'll wrap it up. You had a lot of ancillary business models getting involved. Air conditioning companies became solar companies. Plumbing companies became solar companies. General electric contractors became. And then it was great. And then there's turmoil. And, you know, they were more comfortable in selling ACs. That's what they've done for years. They exited. They closed their bit. There was turmoil. Now, that said, the installation companies have stabilized more because it was kind of people that were getting into solar versus us. we don't do anything but solar. I mean, technically, we're an electrical contractor, so we install EV circuits and EV things. We'll upgrade service panels. We have a roof coating division for flat roofs. It's pretty pictures. We'll coat your roof. But other than that, I mean, we are a solar company. I'm not selling an air conditioner or water filtration system. So we've stabilized a little bit better. Manufacturing has been tumultuous, mainly from China and Germany. China, they had dumping and government subsidies, and they go through economic swings that I don't know or understand about, so I'm a little less likely to comment on that, but they've had some manufacturers fail. And Germany was one of the first major solar adopters in the world, per capita rate, tons of it because of subsidies, right? Sometimes subsidies drive things, and then they removed them. And certain German manufacturers went out of business or went bankrupt or got sold, and that caused some issues. Yeah. Sorry. All right, thank you very much. Anybody else have this guy? Thank you for your time, everybody. I appreciate it. All right. Talk to you down there. Wait, there's one. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Good here, Mark? Yep.
Can we get a copy of the presentation?
Oh, sorry.
I give you some.
That will be recorded,
Oh, okay.
and that is always very
It'll-
access to
Well, it'll be, no. It'll, yeah, well, yes, it will be, but it'll be on YouTube is where it'll be.
Oh, yeah.
Tomorrow morning, it'll be on YouTube.
Can you get your name?